When my son Michael drove me to Shady Pines Care Home, I smiled and thanked him for finding such a lovely place. 3 weeks later, the home was on national news because of what they found buried in the backyard with my name carved into it. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Lavinia Patterson, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood the meaning of family. I thought the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd poured into my children, would mean something when my hair turned gray and my hands grew frail. How wrong I was. Let me paint you a picture of who I used to be before my world shattered. For 43 years, I was the Patterson family cornerstone, not the kind that gets admired or polished, but the kind that bears all the weight silently, proudly, without complaint. When my husband Robert crushed his spine in that construction accident back in '92, doctors said he'd never work again. I didn't cry, I didn't panic. I marched down to the textile factory and took the night shift, then cleaned offices until dawn, then watched kids in the afternoon. 3 jobs, 7 days a week for 2 solid years until Robert could walk again. When Michael needed money for college, I didn't hesitate. My mother's pearl necklace, her diamond ring, the gold bracelet she wore on her wedding day, I sold them all without telling anyone. Michael graduated debt-free from State University with his business degree. He never knew his education cost me the only pieces of my mother I had left. At his graduation, when he hugged me in that cap and gown, I thought every sacrifice had been worth it. Sarah's divorce nearly broke her. Her ex-husband left her with nothing but debt and 2 confused kids who couldn't understand why Daddy didn't come home anymore. For 3 years, those twins lived in my spare bedroom. I became their mother while Sarah rebuilt her life from scratch. I taught them multiplication tables and how to ride bikes, packed their lunches with handwritten notes, attended every soccer game and school play. When Sarah finally got back on her feet and moved them into their own apartment, those kids cried for weeks, wanting to stay with Grandma Vinnie. People in town knew me as the lady who never missed Sunday service, who brought casseroles to every funeral, who volunteered at the food pantry, even when my own arthritis made it hard to lift the canned goods. My garden was famous on our street. Tomatoes so red and perfect that neighbors joked I must whisper secrets to them. My apple pie won the county fair blue ribbon 3 years running. These weren't grand achievements, but they were mine. They represented a life built on putting others first, on believing that love meant sacrifice, that family meant everything. I lived in the same modest house for 30 years, the one Robert and I bought when Michael was still in. Diapers, nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where I'd cook 10,000 meals. But it was paid off, every cent earned honestly, and it was mine. My savings account held exactly $47,000. Not a fortune, but money scraped together over decades of clipping coupons, mending clothes instead of buying new ones, choosing generic brands, never taking vacations. Emergency money, I called it. Security for whatever came next. Looking back now, the signs were there. The way Michael's eyes had started calculating when he looked at my house. The way Sarah asked about my savings, pretending it was concern about my financial planning. But a mother's love is blind, especially when that blindness is all that stands between seeing your children as protectors or predators. Life before that September had a rhythm as comfortable as breathing. Every morning at 6 a.m., my old alarm clock would chirp, the same one Robert bought at Sears in 1978. I'd stretch carefully, mindful of the arthritis that had started visiting my joints, and pad to the kitchen in my worn slippers. The coffee maker, already set the night before, would be finishing its cycle, filling the house with that rich aroma that meant another day had begun. My morning routine was sacred. First, I'd step onto the back porch with my coffee, checking on my garden as the sun painted the sky pink and orange. Those tomato plants were my pride. Big boys and better boys that grew so heavy they bent their stakes. The neighbors, Betty and Frank Morrison, often joked that I must be mixing magic into the soil. Truth was, it was just consistency, patience, and the coffee grounds I saved religiously. I'd water each plant while talking to them, telling them about my plans for the day, just like I'd done for 30 years. By 7:30, I'd be dressed and ready for whatever the day brought. Tuesdays meant Michael's phone call during his lunch break. He'd tell me about his projects at the marketing firm, complain about his boss, share funny stories about his daughters. These calls were precious, usually lasting exactly 20 minutes before he had to return to meetings. I'd sit in Robert's old recliner by the window, watching the street while listening to my son's voice, still able to hear the little boy who once needed Band-Aids for scraped knees. Wednesdays belonged to the church food pantry. I'd arrive by 9 a.m., ready to sort donations and pack boxes for families in need. Martha Washington, the coordinator, always saved the light work for me, knowing my hands weren't as strong as they used to be. But I could still organize canned goods faster than volunteers half my age. The familiar faces of people we helped reminded me that everyone struggles sometimes, that needing help wasn't shameful. Little did I know how soon I'd need to remember that lesson. Thursdays were for errands, grocery shopping at Patterson's Market where I'd worked as a cashier in my youth, stopping by the bank where the tellers all knew me by name, picking up prescriptions at CVS where young Dr. Harrison always asked about my garden. These simple interactions formed the fabric of my week, each person a small stitch in the quilt of my community life. Saturdays brought the best chaos, Sarah and the twins. They'd burst through the door around 10 a.m., the kids immediately raiding the cookie jar I kept stocked with snickerdoodles. Sarah would collapse at my kitchen table, exhausted from her work week, while I made her coffee exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of milk. The twins, Hannah and Henry, would tell me about school, their friends, their dreams of becoming a veterinarian and astronaut respectively. I'd make lunch for everyone, usually grilled cheese and tomato soup, watching my daughter slowly relax as she remembered what it felt like to be taken care of. Sunday mornings meant church service at First Methodist, sitting in the same pew I'd claimed since 1995, 3rd row from the front, left side. Reverend Thompson would nod at me during his sermon, a gentle acknowledgement of a faithful presence. After service, I'd join the other ladies for coffee and gossip, sharing recipes and grandchildren stories, complaining about our aching bones while laughing at our own stubbornness. Evenings were quiet, peaceful. I'd cook simple dinners, baked chicken with green beans, spaghetti with meat sauce from scratch, pot roast on Sundays. I'd eat at my small kitchen table watching the news or calling my sister Ruth in Florida. Before bed, I'd read a chapter from whatever mystery novel I'd borrowed from the library, falling asleep with my reading glasses still perched on my nose. This was my life. Ordinary, perhaps, but it was mine. Every routine, every tradition, every small pleasure had been earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. It was enough. It was everything. The uneasiness started on September 7th, a Tuesday that should have been like any other. Michael arrived at my house at 11 a.m. instead of calling during lunch like he always did. That alone was strange. He hadn't taken a Tuesday off work in 3 years. He stood on my doorstep holding a box of donuts from the fancy bakery downtown, the expensive kind he only bought for special occasions. His smile was too wide, the kind he used to wear as a teenager when he'd dented the car but hadn't told me yet. "Just wanted to surprise my favorite mother," he said, but his eyes kept darting away, focusing on the door frame, the porch swing, anywhere but my face. We sat at the kitchen table where he'd done homework for 12 years, where I'd taught him to write his name, where we'd celebrated his acceptance to college. But now he seemed like a stranger wearing my son's face, fidgeting with his coffee cup, checking his phone every few minutes even though it never rang. He complimented my apple pie 3 times in 10 minutes, each time with the exact same words: "Best pie in the Brigiefras. County Mom." The Michael I raised would have teased me about entering it in the fair again, would have stolen a second slice without asking. This Michael cut one precise piece, ate exactly half, and pushed the plate away. When I asked about his promotion, the one he'd been working toward for 2 years, He waved his hand dismissively and changed the subject to my health. Had I been to the doctor lately? Was I taking my medications? Did I ever feel confused or forgetful? The questions felt like an interrogation disguised as concern. He actually pulled out a notebook and started writing down my answers. When I laughed and asked if he was writing a book about me, his face flushed red. "Just want to keep track, Mom. Make sure you're okay." But I'd raised this boy. I knew every tell, every nervous habit, the way he rubbed his left ear when lying, how his voice pitched higher when he felt guilty. Both were on full display that morning. Sarah showed up unexpectedly an hour later, which never happened on a Tuesday. She and Michael exchanged a look that made my stomach tighten. The same look they'd shared as children when they'd broken my good Voss and were deciding who would confess. Sarah hugged me, but it felt performative, like she was checking boxes on a list. She walked through my house slowly, her eyes cataloging everything like an appraiser. She actually asked about my mother's china cabinet, the one she'd never shown interest in before. "Just wondering about family heirlooms," she said, but her fingers traced the wood like she was measuring it. They left together, whispering on my porch, assuming I couldn't hear through the screen door. I caught fragments. Tomorrow, paperwork, easier than we thought. Michael glanced back at the house, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that chilled me. It was the look of a man calculating profit margins, not a son looking at his childhood home. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been studied, assessed, evaluated. The house felt different, like their presence had shifted something fundamental. I found myself checking the locks twice, something I'd never done in 30 years. When the phone rang at 9 p.m., I jumped, my heart racing. It was just Betty from next door, asking if I was okay because she'd seen both kids' cars earlier and knew that was unusual for a weekday. I told her everything was fine, but as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling fan Robert had installed the summer before he died, I knew it wasn't. Something was happening, something my children were planning without me. The woman who'd raised them, who knew every scraped knee and broken heart, was being kept in the dark. The first seeds of fear took root that night, growing in the darkness like weeds in my carefully tended garden. The morning after their strange visit, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and scolded myself for being paranoid. This was Michael and Sarah, my babies, the children I'd nursed through chicken pox and heartbreaks. The same Michael who still called me when he had a cold, asking what medicine to take. The same Sarah who cried on my shoulder just last month about Hannah's teenage attitude. I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild like some suspicious old woman who'd watched too many crime shows. I decided to prove to myself that everything was normal. I baked Michael's favorite chocolate chip cookies, using the recipe his grandmother had passed down, with the secret ingredient of a touch of cinnamon. While they cooled, I rehearsed what I'd say when I dropped them at his office. Casual, cheerful, the mother he'd always known, not some paranoid woman who'd spent the night questioning her own children's motives. The drive to Michael's office was familiar, 20 minutes through downtown, past the park where I'd taught him to throw a baseball. I walked into the modern building carrying my tin of cookies, smiling at the security guard who recognized me. But when I reached the third floor, Michael's secretary, Jennifer, looked at me with surprise that seemed genuine. "Mrs. Patterson, Michael didn't mention you were coming by today." "Just dropping off some cookies," I said, keeping my voice light. "Is he in a meeting?" Jennifer's confusion deepened. "Michael took the day off. Family emergency," he said. "Is everything okay?" The tin of cookies grew heavy in my hands. Family emergency. I was his only family besides his wife and daughters, and I'd seen him yesterday. My mouth went dry, but I managed to smile. "Oh, of course. I must have gotten my days mixed up. Senior moment." I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. I called Michael from my car. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear office sounds in the background. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" "I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back?" "Just wanted to hear your voice," I said, my heart pounding. "Are you at work?" Where else would I be on a Wednesday? He laughed, but it sounded forced. Listen, I really have to go. Love you. The lie sat between us like a physical thing. I drove home on autopilot, my mind spinning explanations. Maybe he had a doctor's appointment he didn't want to worry me about. Maybe he was planning a surprise for my upcoming birthday. Maybe he was meeting with a financial advisor about his retirement. Anything but the dark thoughts creeping at the edges of my consciousness. That evening, I called Sarah, needing to hear normalcy in her voice. She answered breathlessly, said she was at Hannah's soccer practice, but I could hear the television in the background, the distinct sound of the game show she watched every evening at 7 p.m. Another lie. When I mentioned I might drop by on Saturday instead of waiting for them to come to me, she quickly insisted they'd come as always. Don't trouble yourself, Mom. We'll be there. I spent the rest of the evening doing ordinary things with extraordinary determination. I folded laundry with precise care, organized my recipe box alphabetically, cleaned the already spotless bathroom. If I just kept moving, kept maintaining normalcy, maybe everything would return to normal. Maybe tomorrow Michael would call at lunch, like always, laughing about the mix-up at his office. Maybe Sarah would admit she'd skipped Hannah's practice because she was tired. But even as I tried to convince myself, I found myself hiding my important papers in the bottom of my sewing box, tucking my mother's wedding ring inside an old flower container. Just being careful, I told myself, just being prudent. Not because I suspected my own children of anything. That would be crazy. That would mean admitting that the family I'd built my entire life around was crumbling like old foundation, and I wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo where I pretended everything was normal while my instincts screamed otherwise. Then came the Thursday afternoon that changed everything. I was looking for my reading glasses, the ones I'd misplaced while cleaning the garage. Michael had stored some boxes there last month, old trophies and yearbooks from high school he didn't have room for in his new house. As I moved aside a dusty box of his football memorabilia, several papers fell out from behind it as if someone had hastily shoved them there. My hands trembled as I picked them up. Legal documents, crisp and official, with the kind of language that makes ordinary people need lawyers. Power of attorney forms with my name typed neatly at the top. Property transfer documents for my house, the house Robert and I had spent 30 years paying off. My signature was on every page, bold and clear. But I had never seen these papers before in my life. I sank onto the garage step, studying the signatures with growing horror. They looked like mine, almost perfect. But the capital L in Lavinia was wrong. It curved too much at the bottom, exactly the way Michael used to write it when he forged my signature on failed tests in middle school. I'd grounded him for 2 weeks when I caught him, made him write, "I will not forge signatures," 500 times. Apparently, the lesson hadn't stuck. The dates made my blood run cold. According to these documents, I'd signed over power of attorney on August 15th, the weekend I was supposedly visiting my sister Ruth in Florida. Except I hadn't visited Ruth since her hip surgery 2 years ago. On August 15th, I'd been right here, weeding my tomato garden and watching Jeopardy. Someone had not only forged my signature, but created an alibi for when I was supposedly signing my life away. I spread the papers on my kitchen table, reading them more carefully. The property transfer document valued my house at $400,000. I'd had no idea it was worth that much. The power of attorney gave Michael complete control over my finances, my medical decisions, my entire life. There was even a document declaring me of diminished capacity, signed by a doctor I'd never heard of, from a clinic in a town I'd never visited. My first instinct was to call Michael, to demand an explanation, to hope against hope there was some misunderstanding, but something held me back. These weren't documents created in haste or error. This was systematic, planned, methodical. My son, the baby I'd sung to sleep, the boy I'd taught to tie his shoes, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, had been planning this for months. I made copies of everything at the library, my hands shaking so badly the librarian asked if I needed help. I told her I was fine, just old age making me clumsy. I hid the originals back where I'd found them, not wanting Michael to know I'd discovered them. Then I started searching the house for more evidence, moving through rooms I'd lived in for decades, like a detective at a crime scene. In Sarah's old room, now my guest room, I found a business card tucked into the mirror frame. Shady Pines Care Facility, with a handwritten note on the back in Sarah's writing, "Deposit paid, September 20th." That was next week. In the kitchen junk drawer, buried under old receipts, was a brochure for the same facility. Someone had circled the memory care unit and written "perfect" in the margin. I sat at my kitchen table as the sun set, surrounded by evidence of my children's betrayal. The woman in the mirror across from me looked older than my 68 years, aged by the weight of realization. They weren't planning to help me. They were planning to erase me, to take everything I'd worked for, to lock me away somewhere no one would hear me protest. The forged signatures were just the beginning. My children had declared war on the woman who gave them life, and they didn't even know I'd discovered their battle plans. That Sunday started like any other. I went to early service, prayed for strength without knowing I'd need it within hours, and drove to Michael's house for our monthly family dinner. I'd made my famous pot roast, the one his father had loved, carrying it in the same covered dish I'd used for 30 years. But hidden in my purse were the photocopied documents, waiting like a loaded gun. Michael's wife, Patricia, greeted me at the door with an awkwardness that now made sense. She knew. Of course she knew. She kissed my cheek while avoiding my eyes, then quickly excused herself to check on something upstairs. Sarah was already there with her husband Tom, but no twins. They were at their father's this weekend, she explained. How convenient. No witnesses to what was about to happen. I waited until we were seated at Michael's dining room table, the pot roast serving as a grotesque centerpiece to this family charade. Then I pulled out the documents and placed them carefully beside Michael's plate. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Tom suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. "Mom, I can explain," Michael started. But for once in his life, he seemed to have no words prepared. No smooth marketing pitch for why stealing from his mother was acceptable. "Explain what?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was shattering with each word. "Explain how you forged my signature? Explain how you sold my house without my knowledge? Or explain how you paid a doctor I've never met to declare me incompetent?" Sarah found her voice first, and her words cut deeper than any knife. "Mom, you're getting older. You're not thinking clearly. We're trying to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" I laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. "By stealing my home? By taking the money I saved for 40 years? By booking me into a care facility that's 40 miles from anyone who knows me?" Michael leaned forward, adopting the tone he probably used to sell overpriced marketing campaigns. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Shady Pines is a nice place. They'll take care of you. The house is too much for you to maintain anyway. This way, the value goes to good use instead of being wasted on property taxes and maintenance." "Good use?" My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. "You mean into your pockets?" "It's our inheritance anyway," Sarah interjected. And there it was, the truth finally naked and ugly on the table. "Why should we wait until you're gone when we need the money now? Hannah and Henry need college funds. Michael's got business debts. This helps everyone." "Everyone except me?" I said quietly. "The woman who worked 3 jobs to keep you fed, who sold her mother's jewelry for your education, who raised your children when you couldn't." Michael's expression hardened, the mask of the loving son completely gone. "You did what mothers are supposed to do. Don't act like you deserve a medal for basic parenting. This is what's happening, Mom. The papers are filed. The house closes next month. Your room at Shady Pines is ready, September 20th. And if I refuse," Sarah pulled out another document, "then we'll have you declared incompetent through the courts. We have documentation of your confusion, your forgetfulness. Dr. Morrison, you remember him, Michael's golf buddy, is ready to testify about your declining mental state. They'd thought of everything. My own children had orchestrated my destruction with the same careful planning I'd once used to organize their birthday parties. Tom and Patricia never said a word, complicit in their silence. Michael actually checked his watch, as if disposing of his mother was just another item on his Sunday agenda. "You'll thank us later," Michael said. The same words parents use when disciplining children. "Once you're settled in, you'll see this is for the best." I stood up, leaving my pot roast untouched. As I reached the door, I turned back to look at them one last time. "I changed your diapers. I held you through nightmares. I gave you everything." My voice broke. "And this is how you repay me?" "It's business, Mom," Michael said, already pulling out his phone. "Nothing personal." But destroying the woman who gave you life? Nothing could be more personal than that. The next 3 days, I barely slept. Instead, I became a detective investigating my own murder. Because that's what this was, a slow-motion murder of everything I'd built. I went to the county courthouse, the bank, the insurance office, piecing together the full scope of my children's betrayal. What I discovered made me physically ill. The forged power of attorney was just the tip of the iceberg. 6 months ago, Michael and Sarah had taken out a life insurance policy on me. $500,000 with them as sole beneficiaries. The premium payments came from my own savings account, which they'd been slowly draining through forged checks. They'd been literally making me pay for my own death benefit. The policy documents showed they'd lied about my health conditions, claiming I had early-stage dementia and heart disease to justify the high payout. At the bank, where I'd been a customer for 30 years, I learned they'd already transferred most of my savings to an account I couldn't access. The sympathetic bank manager, Mrs. Chen, whispered that she'd questioned the transactions. But Michael had provided documentation that I'd granted him full financial authority. My checking account had just enough left to maintain the minimum balance. My emergency fund, $47,000 scraped together over decades, was gone. The house sale was worse than I'd imagined. They'd sold it to a developer for $400,000 cash, with closing scheduled for October 1st. But hidden in the paperwork was something that made my blood freeze. Patricia's mother, Dorothy, was listed as the future resident. They weren't just stealing my home, they were giving it to Patricia's mother while shipping me off to die. My photographs on the walls would be replaced with someone else's memories. My garden would be tended by hands that hadn't earned the dirt under their nails. I visited Shady Pines myself, pretending to be looking for my sister. The place was a nightmare wrapped in faded wallpaper and industrial disinfectant. The state inspection reports, which I found online that night, showed multiple violations: unexplained patient deaths, missing medications, understaffing. One review called it, "Where families send relatives to disappear." The facility was in rural Crenshaw County, 40 miles from my church, my friends, my life. No public transportation. No one would visit because no one could visit. The conspiracy went deeper still. I discovered they'd been telling people I had dementia for months, laying groundwork for their story. Sarah had told my book club I'd been confused lately, suggesting they might want to give Mom a break from hosting. Michael had informed Reverend Thompson that I'd been forgetting to take medications, mixing up names, getting lost on familiar streets. All lies, but told with such concern that everyone believed them. My neighbor Betty mentioned that Michael had asked her to keep an eye on Mom and report any strange behavior. Dr. Morrison, who I'd trusted for 15 years, had already written a letter stating I showed signs of cognitive decline based solely on Michael's descriptions. He'd never examined me, never ran a single test, but his medical opinion was already part of their legal ammunition. The most chilling discovery came from my nephew James, Ruth's son, who worked in real estate. He called me after hearing about the house sale through professional channels. "Aunt Livy, there's something you should know. I saw the listing details. They've marked your death date as anticipated within 12 months, to justify the quick sale. That's not normal. That's what families do when they know someone is terminal. But I wasn't terminal. I wasn't sick. I wasn't demented. I was just old, trusting, and in the way of their financial windfall. They'd created an entire fictional version of me, confused, declining, incompetent, and sold it to everyone who mattered. The real Lavinia Patterson was being erased, replaced by a caricature designed to justify their theft. That night, I sat in my soon-to-be stolen home, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that would have made a crime novelist proud. My children hadn't just planned to rob me, they'd planned to bury me alive in a cut-rate facility while they lived in my house and spent my money. The only question now was whether I'd let them. That first night at Shady Pines nearly destroyed me. They'd moved me in on September 20th, just as planned, Michael's strong arms guiding me through the entrance, while Sarah carried a single suitcase containing the few belongings they'd deemed necessary for my new life. The smile on Michael's face as he kissed my forehead goodbye was the same one he'd worn in his kindergarten photo. Bright, innocent, completely false. My room was a converted storage closet that barely fit 2 narrow beds. The walls were painted institution green with water stains spreading across the ceiling like cancer. My roommate, Eleanor, welcomed me with vacant eyes that had seen too many roommates come and never leave. The mattress was thin as paper, covered in plastic that crinkled with every movement. The single window faced a concrete wall. This was my children's idea of nice. I sat on that horrible bed as the reality crashed over me in waves. Each wave brought a different memory, a different betrayal. I thought about Robert, my sweet Robert, dying in my arms 5 years ago. His last words, "Michael will take care of you." He'd trusted our son with his most precious possession, me. If Robert could see this place, see what his son had done, it would kill him all over again. The tears came then, 40 years of tears I'd never allowed myself to cry. I sobbed for the young mother who'd walked floors with a colicky baby Michael, singing lullabies until her throat was raw. That baby had grown up to sign my life away. I wept for the woman who'd stayed up teaching Sarah to read, using flashcards at the kitchen table, celebrating when she finally understood that letters made words, and words made stories. That little girl had grown up to write the story of my disposal. I pulled out the photo I'd hidden in my sweater pocket, a family portrait from last Christmas. We looked so happy. Michael's arm around me, Sarah laughing at something off camera, the grandchildren grinning with chocolate on their faces. 9 months ago, while I was baking cookies and wrapping presents, they were already planning this imprisonment. Every "I love you, Mom" had been a lie. Every hug had been Judas's kiss. Down the hallway, someone screamed, a long, desperate wail that the staff ignored. Another resident shuffled past my door, muttering about needing to go home, needing to feed cats that had probably died years ago. The smell of industrial food, overcooked and underseasoned, mixed with disinfectant and human decay. This was my future. This was what my sacrifices had purchased. I thought about the night I'd stayed awake with Michael during his bout with pneumonia when he was 7. I'd held him upright so he could breathe, counting each labored breath, praying to God to take my health and give it to him. God had answered that prayer, and Michael had recovered. Now that same child had signed papers, hoping I'd stop breathing within the year. Sarah's wedding day haunted me, how I'd spent my entire savings on her dress because she'd fallen in love with one beyond her budget. "You only get married once, hopefully," I'd said, emptying my emergency fund with a smile. She'd cried, calling me the best mother in the world. That same daughter had just collected the commission on selling my home. Eleanor watched me cry with the detached sympathy of someone who'd seen this breakdown before. "First night's the hardest," she said quietly. "You're mourning them like they died. In a way they have. The children you love don't exist anymore. Maybe they never did." I curled into a ball on that plastic mattress, my body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from my very bones. 68 years old, abandoned, robbed, imprisoned by the two people I'd built my entire world around. The sobs turned to a keening wail that brought a nurse, who offered me a sedative with practiced indifference. "I don't want pills," I told her. "I want my children to love me." She patted my shoulder with professional compassion. "They all say that at first. You'll adjust." But I wasn't going to adjust. I wasn't going to accept this. As the tears finally exhausted themselves, something harder began to form in my chest. Not acceptance, not resignation, something that felt like the first spark of a fire that would burn everything down. On my third morning at Shady Pines, everything changed. I was pushing soggy eggs around a plastic plate when I overheard two nurses whispering by the coffee machine. They didn't know I was listening. Old women in wheelchairs become invisible, just part of the furniture. "Another one died last night," the younger nurse said. "Room 47, Mrs. Chen." "That's the fifth one this year who came in healthy and died within 2 months," the older nurse replied. "All of them had families who stopped visiting after the first week. All of them had nice life insurance policies. You think, I don't think anything. I just work my shift and go home." Mrs. Chen. I'd met her my first day. She'd been walking on her own, clear-eyed, complaining about her son putting her here, just like me. Now she was dead, and these nurses were discussing it like weather, something unfortunate but inevitable. That could be me in 2 months, would be me if I didn't act. Something crystallized inside me at that moment. The tears dried up. The self-pity evaporated. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine rage, not the frustrated anger of a tired mother, but the pure, focused fury of a woman who finally understood she was fighting for her life. My children thought they'd caged a lamb. They were about to learn they'd cornered a lioness. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. "You've got that look," she said from her bed. "The fighting look. Good. The ones who fight sometimes make it out." "How many make it out?" I asked. "Not many, but some. My grandson James is investigating this place for the newspaper. Been collecting evidence for months. Lost his own grandmother here 2 years ago. Suspicious circumstances." She pulled out a cell phone hidden in her knitting basket. "He gave me this. Told me to document everything. James Sullivan. 28 years old, hungry for truth, angry about his grandmother's death. When Eleanor called him that afternoon, he arrived within an hour, press credentials around his neck, recorder in his pocket. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much for his age. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been investigating Shady Pines for 8 months. 5 unexplained deaths, all involving elderly people with significant assets. All had families who put them here and stopped visiting. All died within 3 months. Your son and daughter, they've been in contact with the facility director about your deteriorating condition, even though you just arrived. They're already laying groundwork." The words should have destroyed me. Instead, they galvanized me. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Documentation, recordings, proof of the fraud. We make this public. We can stop them." I gave him the photocopies I'd hidden in my knitting bag, the forged signatures, the fraudulent power of attorney, the life insurance policy. His eyes widened as he read. "This is bigger than just elder abuse. This is conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly murder." "There's more," Eleanor added. "Show him what you found yesterday." Yesterday, I discovered something while helping in the records room. The administrator thought giving me tasks would keep me docile. In the back of a filing cabinet were pre-filled death certificates for 5 residents, all dated for future dates. One had my name on it, October 31st, Halloween. Someone's idea of a joke, perhaps. James photographed everything. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you willing to go fully public with this? Your family will be destroyed. Your relationship with your children will be over." I thought about Michael teaching his daughters to ride bikes in my backyard. I thought about Sarah calling me for advice about the twins. I thought about Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. Then I thought about Mrs. Chen, dead in room 47. My relationship with my children ended the day they signed me away, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. They started this war. I'm going to finish it. James smiled grimly. Then let's bring them down. For the first time since arriving at Shady Pines, I smiled too. My children had made a critical error. They'd left me with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. James and I met every day in the facility's garden, a generous term for the small patch of dead grass and dying bushes where residents were allowed fresh air. To anyone watching, I was just an old woman talking to Eleanor's grandson about the weather. In reality, we were planning the complete destruction of everyone who'd wronged me. First, we need legal help, James said, his notebook carefully disguised as a crossword puzzle book. I know someone, Maria Rodriguez from Legal Aid. She specializes in elder abuse cases, won one against a similar facility last year. She'll take your case pro bono if it means shutting this place down. Maria visited the next day, posing as my niece. A fierce woman in her 40s with eyes that miss nothing, she listened to my story while maintaining a cheerful expression for the watching staff. Under the table, she passed me a small digital recorder. Document everything, she whispered while pretending to show me phone photos. Every conversation, every pill they give you, every threat. Georgia is a one-party consent state. You can record without telling them. We're filing emergency injunctions tomorrow, but we need more evidence to make it stick. Eleanor became my co-conspirator. Her hearing was still sharp, and she positioned herself strategically during staff meetings, gathering intelligence. We learned that the facility director, Carl Morrison, yes, Dr. Morrison's brother, had been coaching families on how to declare relatives incompetent. He had a network of doctors who would sign anything for the right price. My children had paid $5,000 for my false diagnosis. I started recording everything. When the administrator visited to tell me I was adjusting well, I captured him saying that my family had requested I be put on stronger sedatives to ease the transition. When a nurse mentioned that my son had called to ask about my life expectancy, I recorded her laughing about it. Told him you're too stubborn to die quickly. He didn't seem happy about that. James's investigation uncovered more horror. Using public records and his newspaper connections, he discovered that Shady Pines had a partnership with a local funeral home. Every resident who died here was cremated there, quickly, often before families were notified. No autopsies, no questions. The funeral home director was Carl Morrison's cousin. We discovered Michael had been making payments to the facility beyond my basic care. Extra money that didn't appear on official receipts. When James traced the payments, they led to a separate account controlled by Carl Morrison personally. My son wasn't just abandoning me, he was paying for something specific. The predated death certificate with my name suddenly made terrible sense. Maria filed the legal papers strategically. First, a challenge to the power of attorney based on the forged signatures. Then a fraud complaint with the insurance company about the life insurance policy. Next, reports to Adult Protective Services about the facility's conditions. Finally, a criminal complaint with the State Attorney General's office about the conspiracy to defraud. But we needed more. We needed public pressure. James had been writing his exposé for weeks, but we decided to maximize impact. We created a careful timeline. Legal filing on Monday, APS raid on Tuesday, story breaks on Wednesday. We contacted 3 other families whose elderly relatives had died suspiciously at Shady Pines, all now willing to come forward. I made my own preparations. Using Eleanor's phone, I accessed my email and sent messages to everyone in my church, my book club, my volunteer group. I didn't accuse my children directly. That would come later. I simply said I was being held against my will at Shady Pines and needed help. I included photos Eleanor took of my living conditions, the moldy walls, the pitiful meals, my bruised wrists from when staff had helped me into bed too roughly. The final piece was the hardest. I called my grandchildren's schools and left messages with the counselors, expressing concern about the children's well-being given their parents' involvement in elder abuse. I hated involving Hannah and Henry, but their parents had crossed every line. This was war, and in war, you use every weapon available. By the end of the week, everything was in place. The fuse was lit. All we had to do was wait for the explosion. October 10th arrived gray and drizzling, matching the electric tension building inside Shady Pines. At 9 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Adult Protective Services, accompanied by state investigators and 2 uniformed police officers. Carl Morrison's face went white as paper when they presented the warrant. Through the window of the community room, I watched him frantically calling someone on his phone, his free hand gesturing wildly. Within 30 minutes, Michael's BMW screeched into the parking lot, followed by Sarah's minivan. They ran toward the entrance, but were stopped by a police officer who directed them to wait outside. Through the glass doors, I could see Michael arguing, his face red, pointing at the building like he owned it. Sarah was on her phone, probably calling their lawyer. Neither of them knew I was watching from behind the dusty curtains, my heart pounding with equal parts anticipation and sorrow. James had arrived with his camera crew 20 minutes earlier, setting up in the parking lot. 3 other news vans followed. Apparently, his editor had tipped off competing stations about the raid. By 10 a.m., Shady Pines was surrounded by media, investigators, and a growing crowd of concerned citizens from town who'd heard about the raid on social media. The investigators worked methodically. They seized computers, files, medication logs. They photographed every room, every violation, every broken safety rail, and moldy corner. When they found the predated death certificates in the administrator's office, one investigator actually gasped. I heard him call for backup, mentioning evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Eleanor squeezed my hand as we watched Carl Morrison being escorted out in handcuffs. He was shouting about his rights, about this being a misunderstanding, about having powerful friends. The cameras caught every second of it. Behind him, 3 more staff members were arrested, including the nurse who'd laughed about my life expectancy. Michael and Sarah were finally allowed inside, but not to see me. They were directed to a small office where 2 detectives waited with questions. Through the thin walls, I could hear Michael's voice, high and panicked. "This is insane. My mother has dementia. We were trying to protect her." Maria Rodriguez arrived at 11 a.m., striding through the chaos in her sharp suit like she owned the place. She found me in the community room and smiled. "The insurance company has frozen the life insurance policy pending investigation. The bank has reversed the illegal transfers. The house sale has been halted by court injunction. Your children's assets have been frozen pending investigation of elder fraud." Outside, more families were arriving, relatives of residents, some looking shocked, others angry. Betty Morrison from next door was there, telling a reporter how Michael had tried to convince her I was losing my mind. Reverend Thompson had come with half the church congregation, all wearing buttons with my photo that said, "Justice for Lavinia." The crowd grew larger. Someone had shared the story on Facebook, and it had gone viral. "Children sell mother to death trap nursing home." The comments section exploded with outrage. Michael's marketing firm released a statement distancing themselves from him. Sarah's ex-husband's lawyer had already filed emergency custody papers. At noon, James's editor decided they couldn't wait for the evening news. The story went live online immediately. Shady Pines scandal, families paid for elderly relatives to die. The article included the photo of my predated death certificate, the forged signatures, the insurance fraud. Within an hour, it was the top story on 3 national news websites. Michael and Sarah emerged from their interrogation looking destroyed. Michael's usual confidence was gone, replaced by the same fearful expression he'd worn as a child when he'd broken something expensive. Sarah was crying, mascara streaming down her face. They saw the cameras and tried to duck away, but there was nowhere to hide. Reporters surrounded them, shouting questions about elder abuse, about fraud, about attempted murder. Then Sarah looked up and saw me watching from the window. Our eyes met across the chaos. For a moment, her face crumpled with what might have been remorse. Or maybe it was just regret at being caught. I'd never know which. I turned away first, denying her even the comfort of my gaze. The shocking twist came when investigators started digging in the backyard. They'd brought cadaver dogs based on anonymous tips about unusual burial activity over the past 2 years. The first dog alerted near the old oak tree, then another. Soon, 3 separate locations were marked. The excavation began at 2 p.m., with news helicopters circling overhead like vultures. I was in the community room with the other residents when they found the first body. We couldn't see the backyard from there, but we could hear the commotion, the sharp commands of law enforcement, the growing horror in reporters' voices as they broadcast live. Eleanor held my hand as we waited. Then Detective Morrison, no relation to the corrupt doctor, entered the room with an evidence bag. "Mrs. Patterson," he said gently, "we need you to identify something." Inside the bag was a small wooden cross, crudely made, with Lavinia Patterson carved into it. The date on it was October 31st, still 3 weeks away, my pre-planned grave marker. Behind it, they'd found 4 bodies in various stages of decomposition. Mrs. Chen was one of them. The other 3 were residents who'd supposedly been transferred to other facilities. All had been wealthy. All had families who'd stopped visiting. All had died within 3 months of arrival. But the real shock came when they discovered what was in my pre-dug grave: documents. Carl Morrison, in his arrogance, had buried paperwork he couldn't destroy. Original insurance policies, real medical records showing the residents were healthy when admitted, and most damning, a ledger showing payments from families for special services. Michael's name appeared 5 times with a total of $15,000 paid. The last entry, dated next week, was for completion of Patterson arrangement. My son had paid for my murder. The number was right there in black and white. James was broadcasting live when the detective announced they were charging Carl Morrison with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Mine. The cameras captured Michael's arrest in real time. The detective read him his rights as my son protested, claimed ignorance, begged for understanding. "I didn't know they would actually. I thought it was just to keep her sedated." Sarah's arrest followed immediately. She screamed that she wasn't involved, that it was all Michael's idea, that she just wanted Mom in a safe place. But the investigators had found her signature on documents requesting end-of-life protocols for a woman who wasn't dying. Her hysteria made for compelling television. The footage would be played hundreds of times over the coming weeks. The story exploded beyond anything James had imagined. "Son pays for mother's murder" ran on every major network. The photo of my pre-made grave marker became the defining image of elder abuse in America. Michael's marketing firm didn't just fire him. They issued a statement calling his actions unconscionable and evil. Sarah's ex-husband was granted emergency full custody of the twins. Their schools sent them home with counselors. Patricia, Michael's wife, filed for divorce that very day. She went on camera, crying, claiming she'd been suspicious, but Michael had convinced her I was dangerous. Dorothy, her mother who was supposed to move into my house, expressed horror at being an unwitting accomplice. She'd thought I'd wanted to downsize. The community turned on my children completely. Their social media accounts were flooded with death threats before they deactivated them. But the most shocking revelation came from Hannah, my 13-year-old granddaughter. She'd secretly recorded her parents discussing me 2 months ago. In the recording, clear as day, Michael said, "Once Mom's gone, we'll have enough to start fresh. The insurance alone will set us up for life." Sarah responded, "How long did Morrison say it would take?" Michael, 2 months maximum. They know what they're doing. Hannah had been too scared to come forward earlier, but seeing me on the news gave her courage. She'd walked into a police station with her phone, crying, saying she couldn't let them kill her grandmother. The recording was played on national news. My own granddaughter had provided the evidence that would send her parents to prison for life. The grave with my name on it became a crime scene photo that haunted the nation. An elderly woman's name on a grave marker, dated 3 weeks in the future, while she was still alive to see it. It was the image that finally changed elder abuse laws nationwide. The trials moved swiftly. Michael and Sarah both took plea deals to avoid life sentences, each blaming the other in a spectacular display of sibling betrayal. Michael got 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and elder abuse. Sarah received 15 years, the lesser sentence because her lawyer successfully argued she'd been manipulated by her older brother. Watching them in orange jumpsuits shackled at the defendant's table, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the children they'd once been. Carl Morrison and his network received life without parole for the 4 murders. Shady Pines was immediately shut down, its licenses revoked, the building condemned. Every resident was relocated to legitimate facilities or returned to families who suddenly remembered their existence. The funeral home lost its license, and 3 doctors, including Dr. Morrison, lost their medical credentials and faced their own trials. The house, my house, was returned to me through emergency court order. When I walked through that front door 6 weeks after being dragged away, everything looked different, yet exactly the same. Patricia had fled so quickly she'd left coffee cups on the table. Sarah's twins had drawn pictures for me that still hung on the refrigerator. Crayon drawings of a grandmother they'd been told was crazy, but loved. Anyway, I couldn't live there anymore. Too many ghosts, too many memories of children who'd plotted my death in the very rooms where I'd taught them to walk. I sold it myself, properly this time, to a young family with 3 children. The wife was pregnant with their 4th. "We want a house full of love," she told me. I can feel that this was that kind of home once. I gave them my mother's china cabinet as a housewarming gift, hoping it would witness better family dinners than it had recently seen. The sale price was $420,000. Combined with the return of my savings and the damages awarded in civil court, I had more money than I'd ever dreamed of. The insurance company not only voided the fraudulent policy, but sued Michael and Sarah for attempted fraud, winning a judgment that would follow them even after prison. I bought a smaller house near my sister Ruth in Florida, a bright 2-bedroom cottage with a screened porch and room for a garden. Ruth helped me plant new tomatoes, though we both knew they'd never match my Tennessee soil. "They don't have to be perfect," she said. "Just yours." We spent evenings on that porch, 2 old women who'd survived different battles, finding peace in silence and sisterhood. The grandchildren were the hardest part. Hannah and Henry went to live with their other grandparents, Sarah's ex-husband's parents. I sent letters, cards for birthdays, money for Christmas. Hannah wrote back sometimes, her letters full of guilt and confusion about testifying against her parents. "You saved my life," I wrote back. "Never apologize for doing the right thing." Henry, younger and angrier, didn't write at all. I understood. How do you process your parents trying to kill your grandmother? I became an unexpected advocate for elder rights. James's story about me won a Pulitzer Prize and sparked national legislation, the Patterson Act, requiring video documentation of all power of attorney signings, mandatory court review of elder care facility admissions, and federal oversight of facilities with mortality rates above state averages. I testified before Congress, my voice steady as I told them about the grave with my name on it. Michael wrote me once from prison, a long letter full of justifications and accusations. He blamed his debt, his marriage, the pressure of modern life. He said I'd never understood how hard his life was, how much he needed that money. I burned the letter without responding. Some bridges once burned should stay ash, but I rebuilt other bridges. I volunteered at a legitimate senior center, teaching gardening to other elderly people whose families had forgotten them. I joined a new church where nobody knew my story, where I was just Lavinia, who made good pies and sang off-key. I dated, yes, dated, a widower named Frank who made me laugh and didn't care about my notorious past. Life at 70 wasn't what I'd planned, but it was mine. Every morning I woke up grateful to be alive, to have fought back, to have won. The grave with my name on it had been filled with concrete, a monument to what almost was. But I was still here, still growing tomatoes, still refusing to disappear. My children had tried to erase me, but instead, they'd freed me to live without the burden of their toxic love. 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in my Florida garden, harvesting tomatoes that were finally starting to taste like home. The morning sun was gentle, nothing like the harsh fluorescent lights of shady pines that still sometimes haunted my dreams. Frank was on the porch, reading the newspaper aloud, a story about another elder abuse case that had been uncovered thanks to the Patterson Act. "They're calling you a hero again, Vinny," he said, using the nickname he'd given me. I just smiled and kept picking tomatoes. Heroes don't feel this tired, this human, this imperfect in their grief. The truth about family is that blood doesn't guarantee love, and love doesn't guarantee loyalty. We tell ourselves pretty stories about unconditional bonds between parent and child, but conditions exist everywhere, in every relationship, every interaction, every supposedly sacred connection. The condition I'd failed to meet was simple. I'd lived too long, held onto my assets too tightly, refused to conveniently disappear when my children decided my expiration date had passed. I think about Michael and Sarah every day, not the criminals they became, but the babies they were, the children they'd been, the adults I'd hoped they'd become. Somewhere between teaching them to tie their shoes and watching them get arrested on national television, I'd lost them. Or maybe, and this thought keeps me awake some nights, I'd never really had them at all. Maybe the love had always been one-directional, flowing from me to them, like water into sand, absorbed but never returned. The other residents at the senior center often ask me how I found the strength to fight back. The answer isn't comfortable. Desperation and rage are powerful motivators. When you realize your children see you as an obstacle to their inheritance rather than a person deserving dignity, something primal awakens. It's not strength, it's survival instinct, the same force that makes a trapped animal gnaw off its own leg to escape. I wasn't brave. I was cornered. But there's another truth I've learned, one that brings more peace. Starting over at any age is possible. At 70, I'm learning to trust again, to laugh without looking over my shoulder, to make plans for next year and the year after that. I'm teaching Hannah how to bake through video calls, watching her mother's features in her face, but choosing to see her father's kindness instead. I'm writing my own story now, not as a victim or a hero, but as a woman who refused to be buried before her time. The grave with my name on it has become a strange symbol of hope for thousands of elderly people facing similar situations. That image, a wooden cross with my name, waiting for a body that was still breathing, changed America's conversation about how we treat our elderly. It forced families to confront uncomfortable questions about inheritance, obligation, and the value of an aged life. Sometimes horror is the only teacher people will hear. I received a letter yesterday from a woman in Ohio whose children tried something similar. She'd seen my story, recognized the warning signs, and protected herself before it was too late. "You saved my life," she wrote. "Your courage gave me permission to see the truth about my own family." There have been dozens of similar letters. Each one is a grave that won't be dug, a life that won't be stolen, a person who will die on their own terms rather than their children's schedule. Greed is a poison that can corrupt the strongest bonds. It turns love into calculation, care into opportunity, and children into predators. But here's what I want you to remember. The moment someone treats your existence as an inconvenience, your life as a financial equation, your dignity as negotiable, that's the moment they stop being family, regardless of shared DNA. So I ask you, wherever you're watching from, what would you do if the people you'd die for were secretly planning your funeral? Would you go quietly into that good night, Or would you fight with everything you had left? And perhaps more importantly, if you have elderly parents, how do you see them? As people with intrinsic worth or as problems to be solved? Share your thoughts in the comments below, but more than that, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of survival against all odds. And remember, you're never too old to fight for your life, never too weak to demand justice, and never too alone if you're willing to reach out for help. The grave they dug for me sits empty, filled with concrete, a monument to failed greed. But I'm still here, still growing tomatoes, still telling my story. And as long as I'm breathing, I'll keep reminding the world that our elderly deserve more than convenient deaths and pre-dug graves. They deserve what everyone deserves, the right to live until they die, on their own terms, surrounded by love instead of greed.